Well, hello again, everyone, and to those of you on Zoom, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Todd Miller, the Vice President of Programming for Brotherhood, and it's my pleasure to present Rabbi Fellman, who we've been blessed to have as our senior rabbi for almost 2.5 years. And on the Steelers Sunday, we've audibled from a conversation about the Reformed Jews' relationship to Zionism to a discussion about the current situation in the Middle East. So without further ado, let me present Rabbi Fellman.
Good morning. Here, let's put this. Where do you get this one from? Give it back to him because I want to be able to have a conversation. So we've got a couple of microphones placed in and around the congregation. So if you have questions, by all means, raise your hand, and we'll be able to get a microphone to you. I would love to tell you I have all sorts of answers. I have none. Sorry. The reality is, in a lot of ways, we're in uncharted waters. This one's different. And I think that's probably the safest place to start. For most Jews, the events of October 7th felt different. For most of us, this didn't feel like a geopolitical event. This was not another round of missiles going back and forth or something like that. This, for most of us, felt like a pogrom. It felt like a different kind of attack. The non-Jewish world, by and large, has not picked that up. And so most of us, we could do a little poll here. How many of you have heard from a significant number of Christian friends since October 7th? How many of you have not heard from a significant?
Christian or Muslim.
Fine. How many of you have not heard? Right? That's a much bigger number than what ordinarily would be the case. So the question is why? What's going on? And I can give you some guesses. I don't know for sure. Obviously, I'm not part of the non-Jewish world, so it's all a little bit guesswork. But for most people, when they see Israel and Hamas and Gaza and Hezbollah and all of those things, their minds flip to the geopolitical issues that have been affecting that area for decades. For us, we saw innocents murdered at a music festival. We saw children murdered. We saw people taken hostage. The sorts of crimes that haven't been committed since the Einsatzgruppen and were roaming Eastern Europe for the Nazis. And that's a different story. And so our reaction is a much more visceral one. Our reaction is, my God, what's going on in the world? Their reaction is, it's more of the same mess. And that differentiation has played out. And that's part of the equation that we've now got to face, which is how do we explain our connection to Israel in a way that our non-Jewish friends can understand it? Now, some have really gotten it. I mean, to his credit, the president has been extraordinary in terms of his reaching out and understanding the complexity of the issues. Forget about his politics for a second. This isn't about a Democrat or a Republican. His understanding that this is hitting differently is unique, and it deserves mention. The situation is unfolding. I mean, any of us could flip on CNN right now and see what the most current update is. 2 hostages have been released Friday night, and there are 198 or something that are still being held. The most recent updates with the hospital attack in Gaza, all the analytics are saying that it was not an Israeli missile, that it was, you can watch the trajectory of the missile going from the Islamic Jihad launching site, and you can see the whole thing, but the rest of the world doesn't care. The rest of the world just doesn't buy it. Now, part of that is the PR game. And for the longest time, the Palestinians have done much better public relations work than the Israelis have. So the question is why? Why have the Israelis failed that one so poorly? Maybe poor leadership. Maybe. What else?
I think it's deeper than that. I think if you, as you know, Sorry. Thank you. As you know, I stand up while Josh fills with it.
Tap it.
As you know, I can argue both sides of most issues. So the question is, I think no one is blameless in this. One could argue that Israel has imposed conditions on the Palestinians where some reaction was necessary. I think we all agree this was not the right reaction, and the question is, what should they have done if they wanted to push back?
Okay.
I would also argue that it's a difference in scale of audience. There's a lot more Muslims and other folks who are more disinclined, or, more inclined to kind of want to believe that rhetoric.
All right.
I'm going to add that I heard a colonel yesterday from the Israeli army in a podcast, and he said, we don't show off what happened because we don't believe in showing that kind of tragedy. And we're not streaming the pictures. And so we believe that the people who were there have suffered, and we understand that, but we don't have to show it off.
Todd, do you have your hand up?
Yes, well, I think over time there has been a State Department bias against Israel because foreign service officers have 20 countries they can go to if they speak Arabic, and only one country they can go to if they speak English.
All right, so the State Department's a really interesting thing, and that goes way back. If you go back to the times in the late 40s when the partition plan was being debated in the United Nations, the State Department had a very clear bias. And Philip, you're going to get mad at me for saying this. The State Department was dominated by a bunch of Yale graduates who were not exactly friends of the Jews. And I don't think it's a Yale inbred thing.
Actually, it was a little bit more then.
That's just it. Then it was. Today it's not. Then it was. And the State Department, that's a long-standing challenge with the State Department. And if you go back, when Truman was trying to figure out how to handle all this, it happens that my master's thesis was on all of this stuff. So I spent time researching and studying it. Truman listened to George Marshall on almost everything, but not that one. Marshall and the State Department kept telling Truman, look, if you support the Jews, you're going to have a 100-year war with the Arabs. And we need them because we need oil. And Truman's gut response was, but this is the Jewish homeland. And so Truman was looking at it in an entirely different perspective. And on the one hand, the State Department guys weren't wrong. We have had 75 years now of unease, to put it nicely. The question is, how have successive presidents dealt with that State Department bias? And they have dealt with it differently. You could go president by president and analyze it. In fact, there was one State Department official this week who resigned.
Don't you?
Who thought that the State Department was too pro-Israel.
Read what I'm thinking about sending to Aya.
You asked about the PR, why is the Palestinian side or Hamas, whatever, winning the PR battle. Excuse me. PR is only as effective as the media that are picking up. It's a two-way street. It's a process, and I think for whatever reason that I don't understand, they have found a willing audience in a lot of the mainstream media, and I don't know where that comes from. It's very unfortunate, and I see it in media institutions that I otherwise have great respect for, and it saddens me, quite frankly.
If you were to do a snap poll right now, worldwide reaction to the hospital explosion in Gaza, you'd find an overwhelming number who say it was the Israelis who caused it. If you look at the analytics say something totally different. But the PR war is already lost.
Not sure if you have seen the recent news releases.
This becomes part of the challenge that Israel has to face. Israel has argued for a long time, look, we're too busy fighting the actual war on the ground to mess with the PR stuff. Yes, but, is I think the answer that comes to mind for me. Yes, they have been, but it's to their own harm that they haven't done the other. And as long as that dichotomy exists, we're going to have a challenge. Yeah.
I was thinking about the difference in when you're listening to reporters from those various groups and people telling the stories, when you hear people from Gaza they tell it in a very visceral, they have lots of anger or sadness, but when, Israel talks, a lot of the time it's very professional, maybe a bit stoic, and that might be losing the audience, but at the same time, when you're trying to portray yourself as serious,
Right.
it can be difficult. And also to remark on the previous statement about, our friends and such just acting like it doesn't matter, is I think they have this feeling like, well, it's countries away. It doesn't matter to you. You're here, and unless your relative is there, it
Right.
doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to you. It's a tragedy, and that's that.
The big difference on this one is that Israel has recognized the rights of Palestinians to exist. Huge chunks of Israeli society have said there should be a Palestinian state. Unfortunately, the leading coalition people today aren't there. That's a whole different matter. But Hamas, on the other hand, says not only should Israel not exist, but you and I shouldn't exist. And that's part of the difference. I don't think our non-Jewish friends recognize that for us, Hamas is a direct threat against us. I mean, if Hamas could come in and wipe out all of us in this room right now, they would. And it's their war is against Jews. That's different. Darcy, you had your hand up in the back.
Yeah, I think what you just said was spot on. I mean, it's a world away. When Tree of Life happened here, I'm not Jewish, but I had people that I hardly knew reaching out to me, are you okay, what happened? I might have been the only Jewish sort of person with a Jewish family that they knew. Because my family, as everybody knows here, my family's Jewish. But you're right, I don't think people understand that connection that Jews have with Israel. So I agree with you.
They really don't.
Carol, and then I'll get to Doug.
I was wondering if you'll be addressing the humanitarian aid quandary, because that's been on my mind.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no question there's an absolute humanitarian crisis going on. There's no question. Do I agree with how the Israeli government has handled this whole thing? No, I don't. I wouldn't vote for Mr. Netanyahu, for dog catcher, much less anything else. And because I kind of like dogs, but So this is part of the challenge, right? So think back to America at 9/11, right? In the months leading up to 9/11, America was a very divided political place, right? The Bush-Gore election had been very close, very divisive. Bush didn't exactly reach out to Gore supporters and welcome them in. There was no act of trying to unify people. And then the attack came. And pretty quickly, America came together. And we unified, at least for a little while, until we started doing random attacks of random countries that sent us off in different directions. But for a while, we came together, right? Israel's in that same spot right now. Right now, they're together because of the attacks. And on some level, as American Jews, we're in that boat a little bit. So I want to help the Israeli government right now to the extent that I can, even though I don't agree with them, even though I wouldn't vote for them. Right now, they're the only ones we've got, and we got a big problem in front of us. At the next election, it's a different story altogether. And between now and the next election, this government needs to be held accountable for why their intelligence systems failed. I mean, that needs to be addressed. Doug, you never got a chance to talk. Do you have a mic?
Yes.
All
To say something that I don't mean to offend, but if here's how I've come to think of this. If if someone from another planet who had no idea about our culture or whatever, but had enough human sensibility, were looking at this, they would say, okay, on October 7th, these people from this really crowded place that looks like it's got awful conditions came across and did this crazy murderous act to all of these other people who seemed like they were just going about their business. Okay? And here we are a week later, the people who had the murderous act done to them, they are turning around and they are doing the same thing to the other people who are sort of, many of them minding their own business in a place like Gaza. And that is a worldview that's a narrative that's going to be very, very difficult to counteract, partly because of the numbers. If you look historically at the numbers, and correct me if I'm wrong, when Jews are lost in any of these conflicts, the reaction of the Israelis is often how many more times Arabs are going to be killed in response. So this is where the narrative is. I don't see how that, you know, in a world of how many Arab people live in the world? 400 million? I mean, we are in real significant trouble.
How many of you were at the rally, the vigil that was held the other night at Shenley Park? Not far from there, over by where the porch is, there was a rally of pro-Palestinians. Something fascinating that I noticed. At the Israel event, speaker after speaker, not all of them, but a number of them, talked about wanting peace for both peoples and wanting to, what you're saying, to reduce the number of victims on both sides. At the pro-Palestinian one, though, there were signs that said, "Free Palestine from the river to the sea." That's different. So on the one hand, you've got people saying there's got to be a way to live together, and on the other side, you've got people saying it's ours. So that begins to display the dichotomy that's going on and the challenge. Yeah.
I don't know how this is all going to come out, but I was really looking forward to this conversation because I was hoping it to be something more than just talking to the choir. And I was hoping it to be really something of a meaningful dialogue because we are amongst ourselves here. And I think, as someone said, there's enough blame to go around. And what has bothered me as much as anything is how we respond. I'm a Jew to my core. I'm a Jew consciously, semi-consciously, unconsciously. How I respond is according to my ethics, my morals. Again, consciously and maybe not so consciously. And those morals and ethics have to do with the way I was brought up as a Jew. And the way I was taught to react to others. And when I see what we've talked about, and then when I hear our reaction, I recoil. Because we are not taking, it's not the high ground, but we're not taking a path, it seems to me, consistent with our ethos, with our ethics, with who we are. You don't ask, excuse me, but I don't see how asking 1 million refugees to exit in 24 hours as consistent with my ethics. And because it is so inconsistent with my ethics, I am affected as a Jew to my core.
Sure.
So.
But they're giving the warning. That's the thing is, and I'm going to say this You think about it where, number one, there's a lot of disbelief about what happened October 7th. No way humans could do that to other humans. There is people that are they're talking. I bet you a lot of people under 25 could not believe that other people can do what they did. I mean, I've seen backpacks with bombs inside of them waiting at kibbutzes that used to have 300 people, now have 200 people. I've seen a lot of pictures because my nephew is 2 kilometers away from Gaza right now. So I would say you don't have many people who knock on the door and say, excuse me, we're about to bomb this, please leave. That's what Israel does. Hamas is sending 6,000 rockets out, not giving a crap where it goes. Israel is warning people where it is. Hamas is taking the water pipes, and that's what they made the rockets into. So you do have Jewish cores, and I'm going to be very much about this, is we're warning, we're protecting. Think about all the money that's been spent on the Iron Dome to protect civilians. Instead, you have another group who puts the bombs or rockets where civilians are. So there is no equating between the two. And also, they're not refugees. Gaza was turned over to, the Palestinian Authority years ago by Sharon. It's their decision. They made the decision to have Hamas there as their leadership. So yes, I don't think anyone should be dying. I don't think any civilians should be dead or what should be happening. But you can't, what do you need to do when you have the people who are trying to kill you are surrounding themselves by other citizens? What is the army supposed to do to protect their people? Because look at what happens when the walls came down, 1,400 people were slaughtered. I mean, that's what I want to ask anybody. What are they supposed to do?
So to answer your question, look, creating 1 million refugees or 100,000 refugees, whatever the number is, doesn't work with my Jewish core either. It just doesn't. But, and I hate using that word, fundamentally, I recognize the right of Palestinians to exist and have a state. Fundamentally, too many of them in power don't recognize the same with me. And there comes a point in my own reaction where I've got to say, I'm finding myself actually coming back to how the world dealt in World War II. The United States came to the conclusion, however uncomfortable it was, that they had to show so much firepower to the people of Germany and Japan to convince them that their regimes were leading them astray. I mean, how many cities did we level? I mean, in Germany, Dresden was completely leveled. Berlin was all but leveled. On and on and on. In Japan, Hiroshima, Tokyo was firebombed every which way. Innocents were killed, no question. But the United States made the decision that we've got to show enough firepower to convince them that their leadership is leading them astray. And I think Israel's in the same spot today. I think Israel needs to be at a point where they can say to the Palestinian people, you deserve better. And we're willing to help you build up if you can make that change. We'll create a Marshall Plan with you. But you got to get rid of Hamas first. And I think to a degree that's the spot they're in. Now, is that one guy's rationalizing it? Maybe. And you can ask the woman in the Steelers sweatshirt about me rationalizing things. She'll tell you I do it all the time. and maybe once out of every, 6 dozen, it makes sense. But I don't know who's got the microphones. I want to make sure we got the. Go ahead.
I want to say something about our, saying that we want peace, we want peace, we want peace. Is our peace their subjugation in their eyes? If it is, they're never going to agree with us, ever. It's not that different from, and I hate to make this a comparison, and I'm not saying that anything that Hamas did is right, but it's kind of like how a lot of people will say, oh, well, We want African American people to be, cool and happy with everything that we're doing to them. And we ignore that we're doing things that are wrong, that are subjugating, that are racist, that are prejudiced, and actually that it's getting worse than it was even like 6 years ago. What if we're doing a lot of the same thing and they don't trust our calls for peace anymore? They see it as, oh, your peace is my subjugation. Not that they can do, like, Ghazians can't stop Hamas anyway. To ask them to do that is to ask something that can't be done. Small wars are difficult to do anyway, but it is very hard for a group to get rid of a large terrorist organization that is actually in more countries than just their own and actually stop them. Even if they were able to go and, let's say, through some amazingness, assassinate all of the Hamas leaders in their own country, they'll come back. They'll come from other countries and come back.
I'm not so sure I agree with it, because look, in the West Bank, it's been a different story. If you go to Nazareth today, you'll see a thriving, growing Arab city. Nazareth is doing beautifully. And it's not alone. There are plenty of other cities who've done it. In the West Bank, the Palestinians have figured out, certainly better than the Palestinians in Gaza have figured it out. Now, part of that is the history of Gaza, and that Gaza, go back to biblical times, that stretch of land has never been governable. The Philistines this is nothing new. The rest of the Arab world, on the one hand, has used the Palestinians as a cudgel against Israel and against the Jewish world. On the other hand, none of them have ever been willing to welcome the Palestinians in and help them.
Why?
Because they didn't want the problem. I mean, the number of two-state solutions, look, if you go back in history, do you know how many two-state solutions have been offered? The nation that we now know as Jordan was the first two-state solution. The British cartographers after World War I drew new countries, and they wanted to help the Hashemite family, who had been the rulers in the Arabian Peninsula and were kicked out by the Saudis. And the Brits like royals, so they wanted to help royals. Sorry.
They also like to redraw lines.
They do. And so the original idea was that on the east side of the Jordan River would be the Arab country, and on the west side would be the Jewish country. Didn't quite work. Then you get, move ahead a couple of decades to the partition plans in the UN, where it's divided again. The Jews say yes, the Arabs say no. When the war breaks out in 48, Israel announces her independence and almost immediately is attacked and war begins. The neighboring countries, instead of saying, come to us, we'll protect you, tell the Arabs living there, stay put in refugee camps and we'll come get you. Which is a multi-pronged message. On the one hand, it is, we're with you. On the other hand, it's, we're not with you. And that challenge plays out. Jordan has an interesting situation today in that Jordan's queen is of Palestinian descent. And Jordan, through the years, has had real struggles with its Palestinian population. There was a time in the early 70s when King Hussein bombed the daylights out of a Palestinian group in Jordan. Caught hell for it at the moment, but then went on to be the king for another 25 years. It's complex in every direction. And I mean, the argument that was made that, how do you convince Hamas? Look, at the height of their power, it was very hard to convince the Germans that the Nazis were bad. It was really hard. It was impossibly hard. But the world came together. It wasn't just the US, it was the Allies too. And I think that's part of the solution here too, is that there's got to be an alliance of countries that comes together that says to the Palestinians, Hamas is leading you nowhere good. Josh, you got? Well, hold on a second. Let me.
Somebody for me?
Yeah, there's just so many. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. There's so many emotional and intellectual contradictions within me right now. But the immediate problem, well, a couple of immediate problems. One is public relations. We typically have collective short-term memories. And when the atrocities against the Israelis happened, there was pretty much worldwide shock at this. On the other hand, that's in the past, and people forget. And the atrocities happening against the civilians in Gaza are in the news front and center. And that's how it is. It's going to continue, as we know. And it's a public relations disaster. In fact, Hamas has won this whole thing. It's a big suicide attack to break up all these relations that Israel was having with other Arab countries.
Right. Okay. I mean, there's some suggestion here that this attack was timed to thwart what would look to be an Israeli-Saudi peace deal.
Right.
And part of, I'm positive, behind the scenes, part of American diplomacy has been for the Americans to say to the Saudis, stay with us. And I would bet anything that Biden himself has had conversations with Saudi officials this last week, and it just hasn't been reported, trying to convince them. And I would bet anything that it's not been easy.
But the immediate problem is that you have to do something about Hamas, and you can't do it by remote control. And there's going to be some conflagration that's going to go on there. It's going to be horrible. And, and we're going to all say, oh, this is terrible. And it is. But what are you going to do?
What did we say when Dresden was being bombed?
Stand on the border and
what did we say when
and say, nah, you're very bad?
When Dresden was being destroyed, what did we say?
I was just a very small child.
Shirley, you remember this. What did we say? When the U.S. was destroying cities in Japan and Germany, were people standing by saying, what are you doing?
No.
They gave them 3 chances. They gave them 3
the U.S. warned Japan and said, these cities are being targeted. And what did Japan do? Japan moved prisoners from Korea into those cities. To say it's a false equivalent, look, it's not a perfect equivalency, but it's the best we got.
One's a big war, one's a terrorist group.
It's not, though, because one wants the death of the others. That's at its heart, that's what it is. Josh.
So I was thinking about that question this morning in a slightly different way, in that, what we're not talking about is what next, right? And I think the problem is that we're thinking in the now, not tomorrow. And if it's a world only between Jews and Palestinians, or Israelis and Palestinians, then maybe this all makes sense. But I think we're forgetting that there's a larger context. And the Palestinian quote-unquote problem is not going away after this war. So what are we going to achieve?
Let me go back for a second, and Reuben, to respond to you. Hamas is not a small terrorist group, number one. And number two, they're not Palestinian.
They're not an army that has...
They are, though.
They are.
They are, though. They're
sense of the Nazi party.
But they are...
Millions of people.
They are backed by the Iranian army. They are part of an army. They are part of Hezbollah. They are part of an alliance, of an axis. They are. And we can't view them any longer as a small terrorist group. We've got to recognize that this is a much bigger piece. Yeah, Iran is, and for that matter, Qatar have been funneling money to them. Now, Qatar is getting all sorts of credit for helping to release these two hostages. What Qatar has not gotten yet is the publicity for how much money they've sent. They deserve it. Hamas is not homegrown Palestinians. Hamas is outside people coming into the Palestinians and telling them what to do. And they've led the Palestinian people astray. And there's a much bigger thing going on here. This is not just Hamas. This is Iran. There's a whole bunch of pieces here connected. Yeah.
Two things. One. Wait. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I thought you.
just to point out, 15 years ago, the Israelis pulled out of Gaza and turned Gaza over to the people. There was an election, and Hamas won the election. That was the only election that they've held.
Right, they have not done a follow-up election since.
There's never been a follow-up election. Right. But the reality is, Gaza could have been an experiment as to what happens when Israel pulls out. They had an opportunity to begin the process of a two-state solution. So this is a very complicated situation that there's no easy answers to this. But I look at this as, the other thing that got me is that Biden wanted to meet with Abbas, the king of Jordan, and I think the Saudis.
The Egyptians, El-Sisi.
And the Egyptians. All right. Who killed that meeting? Abbas.
Right.
Which is something that the Palestinians have developed as an art form. Whenever there is an opportunity, what do?
So one of the interesting challenges is, and we're seeing this in our country too, actually, a lot right now. We're watching people who aren't willing to compromise. And so the notion of finding common ground in a middle spot is becoming harder and harder. Now, in human history, that's never been easy. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm longing for the old days where it was easy to do that. But watch what's going on in the House of Representatives right now. There's a group of people who will not compromise on anything, who are willing to flip the whole thing upside down to get what they want. And we're dealing with it as a country. The Palestinians have had opportunities over time to get 80, 90, 95, 98% of what they want. They've said no. How do you convince a people that if you start at 80 or 90 or 98%, you can get wherever you end up wanting to be ultimately, but you've got to build up to it? That's a much different challenge, and that appears to be a worldwide challenge, not just a Palestinian one. The rise of extremism that you're seeing all over the world reflects that, right? There's a reason Viktor Orban is doing what he's doing in Hungary, and it's the same set of principles at work. Here. I don't know who's got the mic.
Okay.
And I
I'm on.
appreciate that you're doing that, Philip.
Can we call on Zoom people too, please?
One, can you share with us your analysis of Netanyahu's culpability in the weakening of Israel and how that may have helped provide an opportunity for Hamas's incursion? And two, I have a hard time understanding Israel's rationale for launching a ground offensive in Gaza when Hamas is braided among all these other people. How is that possibly going to be helpful?
So let me answer the second one first. I don't know. I'm not a military person. I have no idea. I don't know the strategy. I don't know how to go. I don't know if they're going to be doing door to door. I have no idea. Tunnel to tunnel. I don't know. To the question of Israel's weakening and Netanyahu's culpability, how do I say this nicely?
You don't have to say it.
No, you have to say it manly.
Netanyahu has been interested in Netanyahu. Netanyahu has wanted to maintain power and control himself. He has been very, very adept at doing just that, exceedingly adept at doing that. He has figured out ways to drive wedges in 1,000 different directions, including in the American Jewish community. And to the degree that the American Jewish community has a bigger divide than we did 15, 20 years ago, he's the one responsible for it. Did he weaken Israel to allow this attack to occur? That I don't know. Does he need to be held accountable in terms of intelligence failures and all of that? Absolutely. I wouldn't go so far as to say that he wanted all of this to cover his own corruption stuff, but I can see the argument being made. I don't think he's quite that evil. At least I hope not. I hope not. Any more than I think, I don't think Roosevelt went looking for war. War came to him. And in this particular attack, I think war came to Israel more than anything else. But let me put an asterisk on it. Until I know more, I'm not willing to say that definitively. Israel had definite weaknesses that were exposed, no question. And they're going to have to address those. They will. America has gone through the same sorts of things. We still take our shoes off at the airport now. In Israel, they don't, by the way. I remember being on a trip in Israel, on a rabbinic trip, and a buddy of mine who's a rabbi in Maryland was starting to take his shoes off, and the security guard looked at him and said, "Mister, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm taking my shoes off." And the guard looked at him and said, "Do you really think we don't know what's in your shoes?" And my friend just kind of said, "Okay," and tied the shoes back on, and that was that. Israel will get through this. So that's the other piece of this. Israel will endure through this. The Jewish people will endure through this. Our history is filled with all sorts of attacks and pogroms. We've dealt with worse. We'll get through it. We will find a way as Jewish people to survive, and we will find a way as Jewish people connected to the land of Israel to maintain that connection and build it. And I believe in my heart of hearts that we'll find a way to share that land with all who call it holy. There's a way. I don't know how many people are going to have to be killed to get us there, but I do believe there's a way to get there. Joe.
Dan, I have to ask this question. Is it okay, at least on significant portions of the world stage, for Jews to protect themselves or to retaliate against those people who are attempting to kill them? Or is there more of a world reaction, sort of like, well, we've been killing off Jews ever since there have been Jews. It's been done very frequently. It's always been okay. We're allowed to massacre them as we did through centuries of all the pogroms. Oh yeah, and there's this Holocaust thing, really good attempt. Who are these Israelis or who are these Jews to now say, we have a right to live and to protect ourselves and to prevent harm? I almost think that there's something there of an underlying thread. I'm not sure, but do you have a sense of that?
Two things. Do we have a right to protect ourselves? Yes. Do I think we should all go arm ourselves? No. We don't live in Texas, thank God. I don't think that we're at that point. But I think Israel, the existence of Israel changes the scenario. It changes the whole thing. And Israel's right to exist remains universally accepted, other than by these extremist groups. And as much as the world gets frustrated with Israel and the UN acts out against Israel, nobody at the UN is saying Israel doesn't have the right to exist. And for Jews to stand up and say, we've got to defend ourselves, and Israel to say, look, we've been attacked, we've got to figure out and solve this problem. Not retaliate per se, but rather get rid of the problem, I think is a different story. And so that becomes part of, taking this back full circle now, to the public relations stuff. Is what Israel's doing in Gaza retaliatory, or are they attempting to surgically remove Hamas? I want to believe that they're attempting to surgically remove Hamas. I know perfectly well there will be examples where they cross the line, because it's the nature of humanity. There will be some Israeli soldier who commits some atrocity, because there always is in every war. But do I believe that Israel is looking to just destroy for the sake of destroying? No, I don't think they're doing that. I don't think Israel has ever been in the business of doing that.
Okay, this is Ronnie. May I speak from Zoom?
Like that. But I think that the general gist has been we want to build more for the future and defend ourselves than we want to batter somebody else just for the sake of battering them. Who's got Ben's next?
A couple things real quick. So on the the matter of this horrible situation that the Israeli army now has to deal with in Gaza, I don't know how it's done, but General David Petraeus was on CNN, and he was explaining how theoretically it should be done, and if Israel does it right, it's a painstaking door by door, and you go from rooftop to tunnel, and you secure that, and you just keep expanding your perimeter, and it's not going to be easy. There's going to, but there is a methodical way to do it, and it will take a very, very long time. The other thing I just want to throw this out. I don't want to change the direction of the conversation, but one of the most troubling developments for me here in the United States isn't the Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans coming out and talking about free Gaza and free, but these young woke, I hate to abuse the word. I think that word itself is a linguistic abuse, but that's a different story. Young Caucasians with no skin in the game, who are aligning themselves, enabling, and I don't know how to deal with that. I think that PR war, for whatever reason, has been lost. I'm just curious what you might think about.
I agree with you. Yeah. Part of and it exists actually in the Jewish world to a troubling degree. One of the side effects of how Netanyahu has functioned over the last 15, 20 years is that there's a generation of young American Jews who grew up saying, Israel, they grew up saying that Israel has been allowed to be the neighborhood bully. That Israel has been, that in Netanyahu's pursuit of power, he has built this whole thing. And that their liberalism, which drives them in America, forces them in Israel to say no to what the Israelis are doing and yes to what the Palestinians are doing. That failure is a multi-pronged failure. Part of that failure is on the politics of Netanyahu. Part of that failure, to be blunt, is the failure of synagogues and how we teach Israel and Zionism. It's why I've tried really hard over the last couple of years to shift how we're doing it here. In our curriculum, you've heard me talking about it at High Holidays.
Okay, please.
We made a mistake.
But please,
collectively,
let's
we made a
go
mistake.
away
And
and
we've
give me
got
some
to
questions.
to
I'm trying to get
refocus
on
that
the
and
phone.
reimagine
Please,
it.
you're
We're
distracted.
doing that.
Please.
The hard part is reaching out to that whole generation who feels that divide. It'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. I think the initial response to October 7th in that generation was, holy cow, this isn't what I thought. Because it was such a brutal attack on Jews. The response has been something different. And the hospital thing here is informative, because the hospital thing almost immediately was, two wrongs don't make a right, what are you doing, proportionality, all of that stuff. And the truth of the hospital thing doesn't matter, because they've made their snap judgment and they've moved on. The truth could be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, and it will be eventually, that the hospital attack was not an Israeli thing. Will they change their minds? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who's got the mics.
I'm next. I just can't believe that anybody can't have foreseen this. Forget the failures of Israel, to watch and to do things, and the failure of Netanyahu. This was bound to happen, maybe not this way, but something was bound to happen. And the world, young people in the world around, are also saying that the settlements, what I consider illegal settlements, the publicity that's come out about different neighborhoods getting different kinds of treatment and roads and water and et cetera, that Israel doesn't, the perception is that Israel at large does not treat its Arab citizens correctly, right or wrong, and that the settlements themselves, and that the original creation of Israel was wrong. There's a lot of people out there that feel that it was stolen. So I think that there's that perception, and that's deep.
Right. I mean, there are memes going around on social media that show, that the Jewish population grew exponentially as Jews invaded the land in the 1880s and 90s and 1900s and 1910s and 1920s. The reality is Jews have lived there going all the way back. Yes, there's a wave of migration, but it was not, now whether this was predictable or not, I don't know. I mean, so one of the arguments is, look, you keep screwing the screws on tighter and tighter, what do you expect? I don't agree with the settlement building any more than you do. I think it's misguided, and I think it's wrong, personally. Would you have to expect some sort of response eventually? Yes. I'm not sure I would have expected this.
So I think this is a failure within the parliamentary system.
Well, it's a multi-pronged failure. It's a failure not just of the parliamentary system, but it's also a failure of leadership. It's a failure of political skill. It's a whole bunch of different pieces that created this. There are a whole bunch of different factors at play.
Sorry to referee, this is almost as tough as the Middle East. Joe, and then Drew's going to try to do a couple on Zoom.
All right.
One comment, I pointed this out to you Tuesday night when we were talking at the board meeting. If we equate what happened in Israel, 1,400 lost, if something like that had happened in this country, an invasion of that magnitude, 60,000 people dead.
Right. I mean, the raw number is staggering.
Just so that you get a picture of what that means.
Yeah, it's staggering. I mean, 1,400 in a population the size of Israel's is a staggering, staggering number. And Israel is deeply interconnected so that everybody knows somebody, and yeah. It makes the numbers on 9/11 or Pearl Harbor look small. What do we have on Zooms, Drew?
Ronnie, it's if you're on Zoom.
Okay.
Just try to speak, please.
I am. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
There we go.
A voice with no body. Go for it.
Okay. All right. So I have a lot to say, and I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can. Last week, I spent a good portion of the week in DC with J Street and lobbying with members of Congress who were very engaged and very supportive. And unfortunately, I came back with COVID. So if I'm a little fuzzy, please give me a little extra patience. First of all, I want to thank Rabbi and everybody who's on this call. I think this is a really important conversation, and I hope it's going to be the first of many. My experience and my sense is we are still at the beginning of understanding and figuring out a coherent, rational, humanistic plan. Maybe number 3, this is, and then somebody put a time sign on so I don't take too much time. I believe that we have all fallen, all of us, into the trap of Hamas, who has set this up to discredit Palestinians, to have us go in and bomb the hell out of innocent Gazans. And by the way, I hear the numbers. I am as heartbroken as anyone else, but the ratio is always different. It's always 3 to 1, 10 to 1, 100 to 1, Gazans versus Israelis. And I am not saying one is good and one is not. I'm just saying that's the fact. This is the 4th or 5th invasion of Gaza. So I think we have all fallen into Hamas's track. And I'm going to ask everybody to check out Ehud Barak, the former prime minister, who is saying things about Israel and I believe Netanyahu, but I have to hear more, relationship with Hamas as a conscious strategy to keep the Palestinians separated geographically as well as politically, to make sure a 2-state solution could not happen. Do not take my comments at face value. Please check them out. I need to check them out as well. And as I said, we're going to learn more, and I hope we're going to have more conversations. A couple of very quick ones. Christine Mohammed is the executive director of CARE locally. And there is a video clip of her addressing this, pro-Palestinian rally, where she says explicitly that she has Jewish friends and she is concerned about the lack of humanity. And she takes a moment of silence and mentions the 5th anniversary of the Tree of Life. And if anybody wants to see a copy of that video, I am glad to share it. I actually believe the news has been more credible than it has in any other prior skirmish, invasion, war, whatever you want to call it. And none of this is to say that what Hamas has done is excusable in any way, shape, or form. Are we going to be our best selves or our worst selves? Are we really thinking that we as in Israel, the IDS, Jews, go into Gaza and find Hamas? I mean, seriously, I think it's a serious question. And I think we all have to ask a lot of questions, and we all have to go into our heart. And it's not a question of who is the most oppressed or who has more of this or who has more of that, but coming up with a plan that deals with getting the hostages back. The brutality there is unbelievable. Getting aid to Palestinians. Can I just finish this one sentence? And getting a ceasefire by any means necessary, and getting a real plan for 2 states. And I'm sorry that I cut you off, Rabbi. Please, back to you.
Has Christine Mohammed or any of the other local Muslim leaders here been willing to take off against Hamas? Have any of them?
Honestly, I cannot answer that. And I spent almost 2 hours on a national care call, and I didn't hear that. And that was extremely disappointing.
Right. I think that's part of the problem.
Exactly. I understand.
And I like her. But until the Palestinians are willing to say Hamas is the problem, we got a problem.
Well, okay, I'm not sure Hamas is the problem. I think not moving toward peace is the problem. And Hamas is an outgrowth, as disgusting and as obnoxious as it is. And do we have people within Israel, settlers, who do incredibly ghastly things on a smaller scale to Palestinians, home demolitions, poisoning fields, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we have to put it in context, which does not excuse Hamas, but it needs to be in context.
Oh, on the contrary, I think you are excusing them. I mean,
Oh.
I'm not in favor of home demolitions or poisoning fields at all, but home demolitions and destroying human lives are two very different birds.
I agree with that. And I don't think I'm defending Hamas, but I think it's important we have these conversations. I just want to share one other thing. For me, and I have been in touch with Israelis, Palestinians, people all over the country and all over the world. This is like a combination of, just to make it a little more personal, 9/11, the shooting at Mother Emanuel, where the guy came into the Bible study and just shot a bunch of people, and Tree of Life times whatever, squared. So I think the devastation is huge. I think the ongoing discussion is really important. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm excusing Hamas. I'm trying to put it in context.
But I think part of, for me, part of the solution needs to be a loud and unanimous denunciation of Hamas. That has to be part of the equation. And to be very blunt, I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. One of my real difficulties with the statements from our Congresswoman was that she didn't do that. Right. And I think she made a mistake. I said that directly to her chief of staff, who is a dear friend, and he kind of shrugged. But
okay, did anybody see the statement that Jamal Bowman put out about, help me out, Samantha Wohl, who was shot?
Yeah, she wasn't shot, she was stabbed. That was the synagogue.
I'm sorry, stabbed.
Right.
Well, Jamal Bowman came out with a statement, even though nobody knows anything about the details. And that's the kind of statement I would like to hear from more progressives in Congress.
I mean, I would like it if our representative.
I understand.
Ron, we're going to do one more question, and then we got
one more question. A couple little.
Okay, sorry.
This is a history question. So when Hamas came into power and said, we want to wipe out the Jews, why didn't we take it seriously? And why did we let aid keep going into Gaza for all these years and know that it didn't go to the Gazans, it really went to Hamas?
Because we wanted the Palestinians to have their own free and fair election, which they had, and we wanted to on some level, to respect their election to our own harm, to some degree. Why did aid continue to go there? Look, the humanitarian crisis is real. I mean, the hard part is Japan sent huge bags of rice, which is lovely, which is good. The problem is those bags are now being used as sandbags in the tunnels. So how do you give aid and make sure that they're not using that aid for violence? Right? So there was all sorts of concrete that went in to help rebuild. And instead of rebuilding the city, it built tunnels under the city. This is the challenge. I mean, there's no question there's a humanitarian crisis. There's no question that average Palestinians in Gaza are getting screwed. I mean, I don't know how to say it nicely. It's terrible. It's terrible. At the same time, how does Israel stand by when Hamas says bluntly in their charter, we want you dead? There's no winning this, right? So that becomes part of the challenge. So let me do 2 or 3 quick things. How do we respond as Americans? I think there are 3 or 4 things that we need to do. One is to reach out to our elected officials. If you haven't sent an email or a letter to either the senators or the representatives, there are 2 senators for our state, Fellman and Casey, and there are 2 representatives in our metro area, Lee and DeLuzio. If you haven't sent a message to them, do it. They need to hear from us. They're listening. They're paying attention. They're up for re-election next year. I think I'm being as blunt as I need to be. Be vocal about this. That's 1. 2, if you want to support the Israeli cause, there are ways to do it. Go to the grocery store, go to Giant Eagle, go to the kosher aisle and look for stuff that's made in Israel and buy it. Go to Murray Avenue Kosher across the street and ask them, show me Israeli products. They've got a ton of them. I can't promise they're all good or good for you, but they've got a ton of them. Buy them. The Israeli economy is taking an enormous hit right now. An enormous hit. If you need new shoes, go to the shoe store and ask for Naot or Tevas. They both work. Naot makes all sorts of different kinds of shoes, not just sandals. My dress shoes that I wear day to day, these pair are not, but two other pairs that I have are Naot. Go buy Israeli products. And when this war is done, put on your list to go back to visit Israel and to be physically there to help them. Our temple trip at the moment is still on. We're scheduled to go in December. I've been in touch with the travel agency regularly. They've said sit tight. If you were in October or November, we'd have a different conversation. We don't know where it's going to be in December. And so that's what we're doing. Nobody has backed out of the trip. We'll see what happens. I can't predict it. If it's safe to go, we're going to go. If it's not safe, obviously we won't. And if people back out, they back out. And if we have open spaces and you want to come on that trip, by all means join us. Just call me and tell me, and we'll figure out a way to make that happen. And when this settles down, put it back higher on your list. Go visit Israel. They're going to need help. They're going to need our physical presence there, supporting their economy, supporting what's going on there to help them rebuild and get through all of this. The other piece is, don't be afraid to reach out to your non-Jewish friends and explain why this one is different. It's an uncomfortable spot. I've actually been in it myself. I have a group of high school friends. So I'm 50. I graduated high school 32 years ago. We have been good friends since the middle of high school, so we've been friends for 35 years. In this group, we're spread out all over the country. I'm the only Jew. But one of them is a Presbyterian minister's kid. Two of them are Methodist minister's grandkids. They're connected religiously. Not a single one reached out. Zero, not one. And it hurt me. And I had to decide what was I going to do about this. And I called them on it and said, you got to know, for us as Jews, this one's different. And I need you to know that. And I need you to, and their response was, whoa, we had no idea. It was a grossly uncomfortable thing for me to do. Believe me, this was not something I enjoyed doing. But it's really important. If this one really feels different to you, you've got to say something. And that conversation has to come out. The other piece is to continue saying, look, the Palestinian people deserve better. Because they do. They do. The Palestinian people deserve freedom. They deserve opportunity. They deserve to live as they wish to live. They don't deserve to have all of this stuff happening to them. And so we've got to do everything we can to make sure that their voices are being heard too. And to say just because their leadership is misguided doesn't mean that they deserve to be punished. And I think the more that voice, that message comes from our voices, the better prospects are for everybody. So those are my brief suggestions. Take them for what you wish, but I think that's how we start to deal with all of this.
Can you say what we should write to the representatives?
Yeah, you should write a letter to the representatives saying Israel needs your support. Hamas needs to be named and recognized for what it is. And that in the statements criticizing or responding to what's happened, Hamas needs to be named directly. And said, Hamas is a terror organization who wants to kill Jews. And there's no reason you representative or you senator or whoever shouldn't be signing on to that resolution. DeLuzio signed on. DeLuzio signed on. Fetterman signed on. Well, they can't pass anything because they've got no speaker. But
DeLuzio will respond to you.
Right. I think the others, I don't know. I don't want to go any further into the political stuff, but make your voice heard.
Todd asked me to wrap up. So first of all, this is the beginning, not the end of the conversation, obviously. Thank you all for coming on behalf of Todd and Brotherhood, and let's thank Rabbi Fellman.